In 1912, the New York Times published a story that would vanish from history. Giant human skeletons, over 10 feet tall, unearthed from ancient burial mounds in Wisconsin, disappearing into the Smithsonian's vaults within months, never to be seen again. This is not mythology. This is documented fact. And it is just the beginning of the most suppressed archaeological discovery in human history. A discovery that forces us to confront a terrifying question. What if everything we have been taught about our origins, about the construction of the ancient world's greatest monuments, about the very nature of humanity itself, is a lie? We are told the pyramids of Egypt were built by ordinary men with copper tools and wooden rollers. We are told the megalithic structures of Peru and Lebanon, stones weighing over 1,000 tons, were somehow moved and positioned by primitive societies. We are told that ancient humans, with an average height of 5 feet 2 inches, accomplished engineering feats that our most advanced technology today struggles to replicate. But the evidence, the physical, tangible, undeniable evidence, tells a completely different story. It tells the story of giants, beings of massive stature who once walked this earth, who built the impossible monuments we still marvel at today, and whose existence has been systematically erased from our collective memory by institutions that fear the truth. This is not conspiracy. This is archaeology. Between the years 1850 and 1920, American newspapers, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the San Francisco Chronicle, published over 1,500 reports of giant human skeletons discovered across North America. 7 feet, 9 feet, 12 feet tall. Skeletons with double rows of teeth, 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, skulls far larger than any modern human. These were not isolated hoaxes or misidentified mastodon bones. These were documented excavations, often conducted by county officials, university professors, and members of historical societies. The bones were measured, photographed, shipped to museums, and then they disappeared. The Smithsonian Institution, America's most trusted keeper of knowledge, has been repeatedly accused of collecting these skeletal remains and making them vanish. Former employees, researchers, and even Supreme Court rulings have suggested that the institution engaged in a deliberate policy of suppression. Why? Because the existence of a giant humanoid species that predates or coexists with Homo sapiens does not fit the narrative of human evolution we have been sold. It shatters the Darwinian model. It opens the door to questions about genetic engineering, extraterrestrial intervention, and the true builders of the ancient world. Questions that threaten the foundations of modern science and organized religion alike. But the cover-up is failing. In 2024, new discoveries have emerged that cannot be hidden. LiDAR scanning technology, which uses laser pulses to penetrate jungle canopy and reveal hidden structures, has uncovered massive megalithic sites across the Amazon, Southeast Asia, and Central America. Sites that predate known civilizations. Sites built on a scale that suggests the builders were not 5-foot-tall humans struggling with stone and rope. Advanced ground-penetrating radar in Egypt has revealed chambers beneath the Giza Plateau, chambers the Egyptian government refuses to open or even acknowledge. And most damning of all, DNA analysis of elongated skulls, skulls once dismissed as the result of cranial binding, has revealed genetic markers that do not match any known human population. These skulls are not deformed humans. They are something else. The ancient texts are not silent on this matter. They scream the truth at us, if only we are willing to listen. The Bible, in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, states plainly, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." This is not metaphor. This is testimony. The Book of Enoch, a text removed from the biblical canon but revered by early Christians and still part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, provides even more explicit detail. It describes beings called the Watchers, angels who descended to earth, mated with human women, and produced offspring called the Nephilim. Giants. The text describes them as 300 cubits tall, approximately 450 feet, consuming 1,000 sheep a day, and teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, cosmetics, weaponry, and sorcery. Mainstream scholars dismiss this as fantasy, but identical accounts appear in cultures that had no contact with one another. The Sumerian king list records rulers of impossible height and age who reigned before a great flood. The Hindu Vedas describe the Daityas and Danavas, races of giants who warred with the gods and built cities of immense scale. The Greek myths are filled with the Titans and the Gigantes, beings of colossal size who challenged the Olympian gods. The Norse sagas speak of the Jotnar, frost giants who existed before the gods shaped the world. Native American tribes, over 300 of them, have oral traditions of red-haired, pale-skinned giants who lived in North America before their ancestors arrived, giants who were eventually hunted down and exterminated because of their cannibalistic violence. This is not coincidence. This is global testimony. Every continent, every major civilization, the same story. Giants existed. They were real. They were powerful, and they were destroyed in a cataclysmic event that the ancients called the Flood. But some survived, and their bloodline, diluted but persistent, continues to this day. Look at the ruling families of Europe. Look at their obsession with genealogy, with bloodline purity, with the concept of the divine right of kings. They are not merely claiming political legitimacy, they are claiming genetic legitimacy. They believe they are the descendants of the gods, of the giants, of the Nephilim. And the genetic evidence, the prevalence of Rh-negative blood among European royalty, a blood type that cannot be traced to any known evolutionary ancestor, suggests they may be right. The pyramids were not built by slaves with ropes. They were built by giants with technology we are only now beginning to understand. The megalithic walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, stones weighing 200 tons fitted together with such precision that a sheet of paper cannot slide between them, were not constructed by the Inca with bronze chisels. They were constructed by beings with the strength and knowledge to manipulate stone as if it were clay. The Baalbek Trilithon in Lebanon, 3 stones each weighing 1,650 tons, positioned 20 feet above the ground, defies every known principle of ancient engineering. Our largest cranes today max out at around 1,000 tons. How did a Bronze Age civilization lift stones 50% heavier? They didn't. The giants did. And here is where the story becomes even more disturbing. Because if the giants built these structures, and if the giants were the offspring of the Watchers, the sons of God who came down from the heavens, then we must ask, who were the Watchers? The Sumerian texts provide the answer. They were the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Beings from another world, another planet, who arrived on Earth over 400,000 years ago, genetically engineered Homo sapiens as a slave species to mine gold, and created the giants, the Nephilim, as overseers, a hybrid warrior class designed to manage the human workforce. This is not fantasy. This is written in cuneiform on clay tablets thousands of years old. The Anunnaki needed gold to repair the atmosphere of their dying home world, a planet the Sumerians called Nibiru, a world on a vast elliptical orbit that brings it back into our solar system every 3,600 years. The last time it returned, according to ancient records, was approximately 3,600 years ago, around 1600 BC, an event that coincided with the mysterious Bronze Age collapse, the fall of the Mycenaean Greeks, the Hittites, and the Egyptian New Kingdom. Civilizations that had thrived for centuries suddenly vanished in a span of decades. Why? Because the return of Nibiru triggered catastrophic geological upheaval and a war between factions of the Anunnaki, a war fought with weapons so advanced the ancients could only describe them as the fire of the gods. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, described in Genesis as fire and brimstone raining from the sky, was not divine punishment. It was a nuclear strike. Archaeological evidence from the region shows layers of fused glass and radiation levels consistent with a high-energy explosion. The ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata, describes weapons called brahmastra that could obliterate entire armies and leave the land poisoned for generations, weapons that sound disturbingly similar to nuclear or plasma-based technology. These were not primitive people imagining advanced weapons. These were witnesses recording what they saw. The giants were casualties of this war. The Book of Enoch states that God sent the flood specifically to wipe out the Nephilim, to cleanse the earth of the genetic corruption caused by the Watchers interbreeding with humanity. But the flood was not a supernatural event. It was a geological one, triggered by the gravitational pull of Nibiru as it passed through the inner solar system, destabilizing the Antarctic ice shelf and causing it to slip into the ocean, generating a tsunami that swept across the planet. Evidence of this event is written in the geological record. 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas impact event caused sudden global climate change, mass extinctions, and a dramatic rise in sea levels. Human populations were reduced to a few thousand individuals. Entire species vanished overnight. This was the flood, and it was not an act of God. It was an act of celestial mechanics. But not all the giants died. Some survived in isolated regions, in mountain caves, in remote islands, in the far north and the deep south. The legends of giants lingered for millennia, fading into myth as their numbers dwindled and humanity forgot, or was made to forget. Because if the giants were real, if they were the builders of the ancient world, if they were the offspring of extraterrestrial beings who genetically engineered humanity, then the entire foundation of our civilization, our religions, our history, our very identity, collapses. And that is a truth that those in power cannot allow to become common knowledge. But the truth is emerging. The evidence is undeniable. The giant tools, the oversized doorways, the megalithic construction, the DNA anomalies, the ancient texts, the newspaper archives, the global testimony. It all points to the same inescapable conclusion. Giants were real. They built the impossible. They were the children of the gods, and their return, the return of their creators, the Anunnaki, is not a matter of mythology. It is a matter of orbital mechanics. Nibiru's 3,600-year cycle is completing, and when it returns, the question is not whether it will bring catastrophe. The question is whether we will survive it, or whether, like the giants before us, we will be wiped from the earth, leaving only fragments of our story for the next civilization to uncover and dismiss as myth. But the story of the giants is not just written in ancient texts and oral traditions. It is carved in stone, literally. Across every continent on Earth, there stand monuments so massive, so precisely engineered, so impossibly constructed, that even with our modern technology, our supercomputers, our advanced materials science, we cannot explain how they were built. And that is not hyperbole. That is admission from the world's leading engineers and archaeologists. The structures exist. They are real. You can touch them, walk through them, measure them. And when you do, when you truly examine the evidence without the filter of academic dogma, you are forced to confront a reality that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. These monuments were not built by humans. They were built by giants. Let us start with the most famous example, the Great Pyramid of Giza. You have been told it was built in 20 years by Pharaoh Khufu using a workforce of tens of thousands of slaves or paid laborers, dragging 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, up ramps of compacted sand and mud. You have been told this is feasible. Difficult, yes. Labor-intensive, certainly. But possible. Except it is not. The mathematics alone expose the lie. 2.3 million blocks built in 20 years means approximately 115,000 blocks per year. Divide that by 365 days, and you get 315 blocks per day. The ancient Egyptians did not work at night. They did not work during religious festivals. They did not work during the annual flooding of the Nile. Cut those working days down to 250 per year, and you are now looking at 460 blocks per day. Divide that by a 10-hour working day, and you get 46 blocks per hour. That is 1 block every 78 seconds. Quarried, transported, shaped, and positioned with perfect precision, every 78 seconds, for 20 years straight, without machinery, without steel tools, without the wheel for transport because Egypt in 2600 BC did not use wheeled vehicles for construction. And that is just the limestone casing blocks. The internal structure includes massive granite blocks weighing 50 to 80 tons, transported from Aswan, a quarry site over 500 miles to the south. Granite. Not limestone. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth, composed primarily of quartz and feldspar, materials that rank 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Copper, the primary metal available to the ancient Egyptians, ranks 3. You cannot cut granite with copper. It is physically impossible. The copper would deform and erode long before making any meaningful incision into the granite. Yet these blocks exist inside the pyramid, cut with such precision that the joints between them are less than 1/50th of an inch, tighter than the width of a human hair. Modern stonemasons, using diamond-tipped saws and laser-guided cutting tools, struggle to achieve that level of accuracy. But we are supposed to believe it was done with copper chisels and sand abrasives. The Great Pyramid is not alone. In fact, it is part of a broader pattern of impossible construction that spans the globe. Travel to Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon, to the ruins of the ancient Roman temple complex built atop even older megalithic foundations. There, embedded in the western wall of the temple platform, are 3 stones known as the trilithon. Each stone weighs approximately 1,650 tons. That is 3,300,000 pounds per stone. And they are not sitting on the ground. They are positioned 20 feet above the foundation, perfectly aligned, fitted together with such precision that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. The largest crane in the world today, the Taisun crane in China, can lift 20,000 metric tons. But that is under controlled conditions in a shipyard with modern engineering support. Transporting and lifting a 1,650-ton stone in the ancient world, without hydraulics, without steel cables, without computer-guided stabilization systems, is not just difficult. It is beyond the capabilities of pre-industrial technology. Yet there they are, mocking every engineering textbook ever written. Even more perplexing, just outside the quarry near Baalbek, there lies an even larger stone, a monolith known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, or Hajar al-Hibla. This single block of limestone weighs an estimated 1,242 tons and was partially cut from the bedrock, but never moved. Why? Because whoever was cutting it, whoever had the technology and strength to shape a stone of that size, stopped, abandoned the project, or was forced to leave. There is another stone nearby, called the Stone of the South, weighing approximately 1,650 tons, even larger than the trilithon stones already in place. The fact that these stones exist, that they were quarried with precision cuts and smooth surfaces, proves that the technology to work with stones of this magnitude once existed. The fact that they were never moved suggests that the civilization responsible for them either lost the capability or vanished before completing the work. Now shift your focus to South America, to the ancient site of Sacsayhuaman, perched on a hill overlooking the city of Cusco in Peru. Here you will find megalithic walls constructed from blocks of andesite, a volcanic rock nearly as hard as granite, some weighing over 200 tons. These blocks are not rectangular, they are not uniform, they are polygonal, fitted together in interlocking shapes with dozens of angles and curves per stone. The precision is staggering. There are no gaps, no mortar. The stones fit so tightly that you cannot insert a razor blade between them, and this is after 500 years of earthquakes, weathering, and tourism. The Inca, who occupied Cusco in the 15th century, claimed they did not build these walls. They said the walls were there when they arrived, built by a race of giants in a time before memory. Spanish conquistadors, who saw the walls in the 1500s, wrote that they believed the structures were the work of demons because no human could accomplish such engineering. Modern archaeologists, unwilling to admit ignorance, attribute the construction to the Inca anyway, despite the Inca's own insistence that they did not build them, despite the complete absence of any Inca tools or records explaining the technique, and despite the fact that the Inca's own stonework, found in the upper layers of the same structures, is visibly inferior, using smaller stones with rougher cuts and mortar to hold them in place. The same pattern repeats at Ollantaytambo, another Peruvian site, where massive blocks of red porphyry, some weighing 50 tons, were transported from a quarry on the opposite side of a river canyon and lifted to a terrace high above the valley floor. The blocks were cut with laser-like precision, featuring perfectly smooth faces and interlocking grooves that suggest modular construction, as if the stones were designed to fit together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. The angles are not 90 degrees. They are complex geometric forms that required an understanding of three-dimensional space, advanced mathematics, and engineering principles that supposedly did not exist in pre-Columbian South America. Yet they are there, undeniable, weighing hundreds of tons, fitted with perfection. And the archaeologists, the academics, the so-called experts, they shrug and say, well, they must have used ramps and ropes and thousands of workers. How? They do not answer. Because they cannot. But the impossibility does not stop with the size and weight of the stones. It extends to the precision of the cuts and the tools required to make them. In the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, locked away in the basement, inaccessible to most tourists, there are dozens of ancient stone vessels, vases, bowls, and jars carved from diorite, basalt, and granite. These are not crude pottery. They are perfectly symmetrical, with walls of uniform thickness, some as thin as a few millimeters, hollowed out from solid blocks of stone that rank 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. To create a hollow vessel with perfectly uniform walls from granite requires not just cutting tools, but measuring instruments, rotational machinery, and an understanding of material stress that ensures the stone does not crack or shatter during the carving process. Modern artisans, using CNC machines, computer numerical control lathes that can carve stone with robotic precision, have attempted to replicate these vessels and found it extremely difficult even with digital technology. Yet we are told these were made by ancient Egyptians using copper tools, sand, and patience. Even more disturbing are the giant stone boxes found in the Serapeum of Saqqara, an underground tunnel complex south of Cairo. These are not sarcophagi in the traditional sense. They are massive granite boxes, each weighing up to 100 tons, carved from single blocks of stone, with perfectly flat surfaces accurate to within 2/10,000ths of an inch. That level of flatness is what machinists call optical flatness, a level of precision used in modern scientific instruments like telescope mirrors and laser calibration surfaces. To achieve optical flatness in stone requires not just cutting, but grinding, polishing, and constant measurement using straight edges and gauges accurate to within microns. The interior corners of these boxes are perfectly square, 90-degree angles with no rounding, no tool marks, no evidence of chiseling. The lids, which weigh several tons each, fit the openings with such precision that when closed, the seal is nearly airtight. How? With what tools? With what knowledge? Egyptologists claim these boxes were intended to hold the mummified remains of sacred bulls, part of the Apis bull cult. But there are no mummies inside, no evidence of organic remains, no hieroglyphic inscriptions indicating religious purpose. Just perfectly machined stone boxes that serve no apparent function, unless their function was something we no longer understand. The tools themselves tell a story that archaeology refuses to hear. In the Cairo Museum, in the Petrie collection, there are core samples drilled from granite blocks, cylindrical stone cores extracted from the rock using tubular drill bits. The cores show spiral grooves that indicate a feed rate, the speed at which the drill penetrated the stone, of 1/10 of an inch per revolution. To drill through granite at that rate requires tremendous rotational speed, immense downward pressure, and a drill bit harder than the stone itself. Diamond-tipped drill bits, or something even harder. The ancient Egyptians, according to the official timeline, had copper and bronze. Neither metal can drill granite. Sand and water can be used as an abrasive, but that process is slow, requiring hours to penetrate even an inch of granite, not the rapid feed rate evidenced by the grooves. The only conclusion, if we follow the evidence, is that whoever drilled those cores had access to advanced drilling technology that could exert thousands of pounds of pressure, rotate at high speeds, and use cutting materials far harder than copper or bronze. Then there are the marks left on the stones themselves. At the Giza Plateau, on some of the granite blocks inside the king's chamber, there are saw marks, long straight cuts that indicate the use of saws spanning several feet in length. The cuts are clean, uniform, and show no signs of the blade wandering or skipping, which would happen if the saw were handheld or operated by human muscle power alone. The depth and straightness of the cuts suggest mechanical sawing, powered sawing, with a blade held rigid by a frame or mechanical guide. Modern stonemasons use circular saws with diamond-embedded blades, running on electric or gasoline-powered motors to cut granite. The ancient Egyptians, we are told, used copper saws with sand as an abrasive. Tests have been conducted. Experimental archaeologists have attempted to cut granite using copper saws and sand. The results are laughable. The copper blade deforms almost immediately. The sand embeds in the copper, creating a grinding surface, but the process is excruciatingly slow, taking hours to cut through inches of stone, and the resulting cut is rough, uneven, and nothing like the precision cuts found on the pyramid blocks. Yet the narrative persists. Copper and sand, patience and manpower. Deny the evidence, ignore the impossibility, maintain the lie. But perhaps the most compelling evidence that these structures were built by beings far larger and stronger than modern humans lies not in the stones themselves, but in the architecture surrounding them. The doorways, the passages, the chambers. Throughout the ancient world, in Egypt, in Peru, in Lebanon, in Mexico, there are doorways and corridors that are absurdly oversized for human use. The entrance to the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, for example, features a doorway over 30 feet tall. The main passageways inside the Great Pyramid are narrow. Yes, but the Grand Gallery, the ascending corridor that leads to the king's chamber, is 28 feet high, with a corbelled ceiling that serves no practical purpose if the builders were 5 feet tall. Why build a corridor nearly 6 times the height of the workers? Why waste the labor and resources? Unless the workers, or at least the overseers, were not 5 feet tall, unless they were 10, 12, 15 feet tall, unless they needed that clearance. In the ruins of Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, there is a gateway known as the Gateway of the Sun, carved from a single block of andesite weighing approximately 10 tons. The doorway itself is human-sized, but the block is massive, and the carvings on its surface depict figures that are disproportionately tall, elongated, with features that do not match the surrounding indigenous population. The site of Tiwanaku is estimated to be over 12,000 years old, based on astronomical alignments and erosion patterns, which places its construction long before the rise of the Inca, long before the supposed dawn of civilization in the Near East. Who built it? The local legends, passed down through the Aymara people, say it was built by the gods in a single night. Beings who came from the stars and shaped the stones with sound, with vibration, with a technology that turned stone into clay. Mainstream archaeology dismisses this as myth. But what if it is not myth? What if it is testimony? The evidence continues to mount. In 1930, in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea, archaeologists discovered a mass grave containing the remains of several hundred individuals who had been buried hastily, without ceremony, their bones showing signs of violent death. Among the remains were several skeletons of abnormal size, individuals estimated to have stood between 7 and 9 feet tall. The bones were shipped to the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem, where they were catalogued and then, like so many other inconvenient discoveries, quietly removed from public display. There are photographs, there are records, but the bones themselves have vanished. Why? Because they do not fit the narrative, because they suggest that the biblical accounts of giants in Canaan, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the sons of Anak, who terrified the Israelite spies, were not exaggerations. They were descriptions of real beings, real populations of oversized humanoids who lived in the Levant during the Bronze Age. In the 1950s, in the Euphrates Valley of Turkey, road construction workers uncovered a series of tombs containing skeletal remains of extraordinary size. Local reports described femur bones over 30 inches long, which would indicate individuals standing well over 9 feet tall. Photographs were taken, measurements were recorded, and then, as has happened repeatedly throughout the 20th century, the remains were confiscated by government authorities and disappeared. The official explanation, when any explanation was given at all, was that the bones were misidentified, that they belonged to large animals, or that the reports were exaggerated by locals seeking attention. But the photographs exist, the newspaper articles exist, and the pattern is consistent. Wherever giant bones are found, they are collected, hidden, or destroyed. Not studied, not displayed, not acknowledged. Hidden. The Smithsonian Institution in particular has been accused repeatedly of participating in this suppression. In 2014, a satirical news article claimed that the Supreme Court had forced the Smithsonian to release classified documents admitting to the destruction of tens of thousands of giant skeletons in the early 1900s. The article was fake, part of a satirical website, but the fact that it went viral, that millions of people believed it and shared it, reveals a deep public distrust of the institution. And that distrust is not unfounded. There are court cases, there are Freedom of Information Act requests, there are testimonies from former Smithsonian employees claiming that a policy existed, an unwritten but widely understood directive to dispose of any skeletal remains that did not conform to the accepted narrative of human evolution. Whether that policy was official or unofficial, the result is the same. The evidence has been erased, but not all evidence can be erased. In Asuka Park, Japan, there is a stone artifact known as the Masuda no Iwafune, a massive block of granite weighing approximately 800 tons, carved with precision holes and ridges that suggest it was part of a larger structure or machine. The surface is smooth, the angles are precise, and the purpose is utterly unknown. Local legends say it was a boat used by the gods, a vessel that could fly through the sky. Archaeologists have no explanation for it. They date it vaguely to the 7th century, but there is no evidence of who carved it, how it was moved, or what it was intended to be. It simply exists, a giant, inexplicable artifact that does not fit any known historical context. In Sri Lanka, in the remote region of Ragala, there are footprints carved into solid rock, footprints measuring over 5 feet in length. They are known as the footprints of Hanuman, named after the giant monkey god of Hindu mythology. But they are not symbolic. They are anatomically detailed, showing the heel, the arch, the toes, the pressure points. They are gigantic. And they are real. Geologists who have examined the site confirm that the impressions are not natural formations. They were either carved or, more disturbingly, pressed into the rock when it was softer, which would require immense weight and pressure, the kind of pressure exerted by a being weighing several tons. The local population worships the site, believing it to be the footprint of a god. But what if it is not a god? What if it is a giant? Similar footprints have been found in South Africa, in the granite bedrock near the town of Mphalusi, close to the border with Swaziland. The print is over 4 feet long, clearly defined, with 5 toes and a clear heel. The granite in which it is embedded is estimated to be between 200 million and 3 billion years old, which is obviously inconsistent with the existence of any humanoid species. Mainstream geologists dismiss it as a natural erosion pattern, a coincidence of weathering that happens to resemble a footprint. But the detail is extraordinary, the proportions are correct, the anatomy matches, and if you stand next to it, if you place your own foot beside it, the scale is overwhelming. Whatever made that print, if it was indeed a print and not a carving, was massive, far larger than any known primate, any known hominid, any known species in the fossil record. And then there are the tools, the hammers, the axes, the implements that are simply too large for normal human use. In Egypt, in the open-air museum at Karnak, there is a stone hammer weighing over 200 pounds. It is displayed as a ceremonial object, a symbolic tool used in religious rituals. But the wear patterns on the striking surface indicate it was actually used, that it was swung with force repeatedly against hard stone. To lift a 200-pound hammer requires exceptional strength. To swing it as a tool, to generate the momentum necessary to shape stone, requires a level of physical power that no normal human possesses. A professional strongman, a weightlifter at the peak of human capability, might be able to lift such a hammer overhead. But to use it as a working tool for hours, day after day, is beyond human capacity. Unless the user was not human-sized, unless the user stood 10 or 12 feet tall and possessed the musculature to match. The evidence is everywhere. In plain sight. Denied, dismissed, explained away with vague references to patience, manpower, and primitive ingenuity. But the explanations do not hold, the mathematics do not work, the physics do not allow it, and the more you examine the structures, the more you measure the stones, the more you analyze the precision, the more inescapable the conclusion becomes. These monuments were not built by ordinary humans, they were built by giants, beings of extraordinary size, strength, and technological capability, beings whose existence has been systematically erased from history because their existence demands answers to questions we are not supposed to ask. Questions about our origins, about genetic engineering, about intervention by advanced civilizations, about the true nature of the gods. And those questions, those terrifying, paradigm-shattering questions, are precisely what the institutions of academia, government, and religion have spent centuries trying to suppress. But the structures are just the shadow. The real evidence lies in the words, the testimony, the texts that have survived thousands of years, copied and recopied, translated and retranslated, texts that humanity has dismissed as mythology, as allegory, as the primitive imagination of ancient peoples trying to make sense of a world they did not understand. Except they are not mythology, they are history, they are eyewitness accounts. And when you read them, truly read them without the filter of modern skepticism, without the assumption that ancient people were ignorant, you realize they are describing real events, real beings, real encounters with entities that walked the earth long before our recorded history begins. The giants are not legend, they are documented. And the documentation spans every major civilization, every continent, every religious tradition. This is not coincidence. This is consensus. Start with the Bible, the most widely read text in human history, a text that billions of people revere as the literal Word of God. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4 states clearly, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, 'My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown.' This is not metaphor, this is genealogy. The sons of God, beings from the heavens, mated with human women and produced offspring called Nephilim, a Hebrew word that translates to those who fell or those who cause others to fall. Giants, hybrids, beings of mixed divine and human ancestry. The text does not stop there. In Numbers chapter 13, when Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan to scout the land, they return with a terrifying report. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Grasshoppers. Think about that. These were grown men, warriors, scouts, selected for their courage and skill, and they described themselves as insects compared to the inhabitants of Canaan. How tall would a human have to be to make a 6-foot man feel like a grasshopper? 10 feet? 12 feet? 15 feet? The Israelites were so terrified by what they saw that they refused to enter the land, despite God's command, and wandered the desert for 40 more years until that generation died out. That is not the behavior of men who saw tall humans. That is the behavior of men who saw giants. The descendants of Anak, the Anakim, are mentioned repeatedly throughout the Old Testament as a race of giants living in Canaan, particularly in Hebron, Gaza, and Gath. King Og of Bashan, described in Deuteronomy chapter 3, was one of the last of the Rephaim, another race of giants. His bed, made of iron, measured 9 cubits by 4 cubits, approximately 13.5 feet long by 6 feet wide. Some scholars argue this was a ceremonial bed, exaggerated for symbolic purposes, but the text specifies the material, iron, and the location, Rabbah of the Ammonites, and the fact that it was displayed as a curiosity, suggesting it was real, tangible, and noteworthy precisely because of its size. A 13-foot bed for a being over 10 feet tall. Not a myth. A measurement. Goliath of Gath, the Philistine champion killed by David, is described in 1 Samuel chapter 17 as standing 6 cubits and a span, approximately 9 feet 9 inches. He wore bronze armor weighing 125 pounds and carried a spear whose iron point alone weighed 15 pounds. Modern skeptics claim Goliath was simply a very tall man, perhaps suffering from pituitary gigantism, a genetic disorder that causes excessive growth. But pituitary gigantism weakens the body, causes joint pain, heart problems, and shortened lifespan. Goliath was a warrior, a champion, described as powerful and fearsome, not frail and diseased, and he was not unique. 2 Samuel chapter 21 describes 4 other giants, relatives of Goliath, who fought against the Israelites. One had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 digits in total, a genetic trait that appears repeatedly in accounts of giants. This is not literary invention. This is biological detail. But the Bible is just one source. The Book of Enoch, a Jewish apocalyptic text written around 300 BC, but claiming to record the words of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, provides far more explicit detail. Enoch describes the Watchers, 200 angels who descended to Mount Hermon, took human wives, and fathered the Nephilim. The text lists the names of the Watchers, their leaders, Samyaza, Azazel, Armaros, and describes what they taught humanity. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and armor, the art of warfare. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. These were not primitive gods demanding sacrifice. These were teachers, technologists, beings with advanced knowledge who shared that knowledge with humans. The Nephilim themselves, according to Enoch, grew to enormous size and consumed everything in their path, and they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. The earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. The Nephilim were not just giants, they were predators. Cannibals. Beings whose appetites were insatiable, whose violence was uncontrollable. And God, seeing the corruption they had caused, decided to wipe them out. The flood was not a random act of divine wrath. It was a targeted extermination, an attempt to cleanse the earth of a genetic abomination. And Enoch, the text says, was taken up into heaven before the flood, shown the future, and tasked with recording the truth so that future generations would know what happened. The book of Enoch was revered by early Christians, quoted in the New Testament, and included in the biblical canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It was removed from the Western canon not because it was false, but because it was too revealing. Now travel across the world to ancient Mesopotamia, to the Sumerian civilization, the oldest known civilization in human history, predating Egypt, predating the Bible, predating everything. The Sumerians left behind thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform, the earliest form of writing, and those tablets describe a creation story that is disturbingly similar to Genesis, but with far more detail. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, describes the gods as physical beings, not abstract spiritual forces. The Atrahasis, another Sumerian text, describes the creation of humans by the god Enki, who mixed the blood of a slain god with clay to create a worker species, a slave race designed to toil in the mines and serve the gods. This is not metaphor. The text is explicit. Humans were created to work, to serve, to mine gold. The Sumerian king list, a stone tablet listing the rulers of Sumer, begins with kings who reigned before the Great Flood, kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years. Alulim, the first king of Eridu, reigned for 28,800 years. Alalangar reigned for 36,000 years. These are not symbolic numbers. They are presented as historical fact, recorded alongside the reigns of later kings whose lengths are far more believable. The list states plainly, after the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. The flood is treated as a real event, a dividing line in history. And the kings before the flood, the antediluvian kings, are described as being of great stature, larger and stronger than the men who came after. The Sumerian texts also describe the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, as the gods who ruled over humanity. Enki, Enlil, Anu, Inanna, Ninurta. These were not abstract deities. They were rulers, governors, administrators. They had families. They had conflicts. They fought wars with each other, wars described in such vivid detail that they sound like eyewitness accounts of aerial combat and advanced weaponry. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, describes the hero Gilgamesh as 2/3 god and 1/3 human, a hybrid, and his companion Enkidu as a wild man of enormous strength created by the gods. Gilgamesh is described as standing 11 cubits tall, approximately 16.5 feet. The text says he was so large that no normal man could wear his armor or wield his weapons. Again, not metaphor. Measurement. The ancient Hindus left similar accounts. The Vedas, the oldest sacred texts of Hinduism, describe races of giants called the Daityas and Danavas, beings of immense size and strength who warred with the Devas, the gods. The Mahabharata, one of the longest epic poems ever written, describes wars fought with weapons called astras, divine weapons capable of destroying entire armies. The Brahmastra, the most powerful of these weapons, is described as releasing a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, producing a gigantic pillar of fire and smoke that rises to the sky and spreads devastation over a circular area spanning miles. The text says, the weapon causes hair and nails to fall out, that pottery breaks without cause, that birds turn white, and that food becomes poisoned. Those are the symptoms of radiation exposure. The Mahabharata is not describing magical fireballs, it is describing nuclear weapons. The Ramayana, another Hindu epic, describes the hero Rama as an avatar of the god Vishnu, a being of divine origin who stood over 7 feet tall and wielded weapons of immense power. His enemy, Ravana, the demon king of Lanka, is described as having 10 heads and 20 arms, which most scholars interpret as symbolic, but the text also says Ravana commanded an army of Rakshasas, giant humanoid beings who could change shape, fly through the air, and devour humans. The descriptions are consistent with the Nephilim, with the Anakim, with the giants of every other ancient culture. Large, powerful, violent, and ultimately destroyed by the gods. The ancient Greeks recorded similar stories. The Titans, the first generation of gods, were described as beings of colossal size who ruled the earth before being overthrown by the Olympian gods in a war called the Titanomachy. Hesiod's Theogony describes the Titans as enormous, capable of hurling mountains, shaking the earth, and splitting the sky. The Gigantes, or giants, were another race of beings, born from the blood of the castrated god Uranus, who waged war against the Olympians in a conflict called the Gigantomachy. The Greeks did not view these as fairy tales. They viewed them as history, as the events that shaped the world. The ruins of Mycenae, the ancient fortress city ruled by King Agamemnon, feature walls built from blocks so large that later Greeks called them Cyclopean walls, believing they had been built by the Cyclopes, a race of one-eyed giants. The Greeks could not conceive of humans building such structures, so they attributed them to giants. And they may have been right. The Norse sagas describe the Jotnar, the frost giants who existed before the gods and who will return at Ragnarok, the end of the world, to wage a final battle. The Jotnar are described as living in Jotunheim, a realm separate from Midgard, the world of humans, but accessible through certain passages. They are portrayed as immensely strong, capable of shaping mountains and controlling the weather. The god Thor, the defender of humanity, spends much of his time hunting and killing giants, suggesting they were a persistent threat. The sagas are filled with detailed descriptions of individual giants, their names, their lineages, their conflicts. This is not abstract mythology. This is recorded history, passed down orally for generations, and eventually written down in the medieval period. Native American tribes, over 300 of them, have oral traditions describing giants. The Paiute people of Nevada tell the story of the Sitaka, a race of red-haired, pale-skinned giants who lived in caves and practiced cannibalism. According to the legend, the Paiute ancestors eventually united with other tribes and besieged the giants in Lovelock Cave, setting fire to the entrance and killing those who refused to surrender. In 1911, miners excavating bat guano from Lovelock Cave discovered human remains, including skulls significantly larger than normal, red hair, and artifacts that suggested a culture distinct from the surrounding tribes. The remains were removed, some sent to museums, others lost. Photographs exist, reports exist, but once again, the evidence has been scattered and suppressed. The Iroquois speak of a race of stone giants called the Genosqua, beings of immense size covered in scales like armor, who terrorized their ancestors until the tribes banded together to destroy them. The Comanche tell of a race of giants who lived in the Oklahoma plains and hunted buffalo by hand, creatures so strong they could crush a bison's skull with their bare hands. The Navajo describe the Anaya, giant monsters who roamed the earth before the Hero twins killed them and restored balance. The consistency is striking. Different tribes, different languages, different regions, but the same core narrative. Giants existed. Giants were dangerous. Giants were destroyed. And in every case, the destruction required cooperation, strategy, and divine or heroic intervention. These were not normal enemies. Even the Islamic tradition acknowledges giants. The Quran does not describe them explicitly, but the Hadith, the recorded sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, mention that Adam, the first human, was 60 cubits tall, approximately 90 feet, and that humanity has been decreasing in size ever since. The Hadith also describe the people of Ad, a nation of giants mentioned in the Quran, who were destroyed by a catastrophic wind that lasted 7 nights and 8 days, leaving their cities in ruins. Archaeological sites in the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, massive stone structures buried beneath the sand, are believed by some researchers to be the remnants of the Ayyad civilization. The Saudi government has restricted access to these sites, preventing independent investigation. Why? What are they hiding? The evidence is global. The testimony is unanimous. Every major civilization, every religious tradition, every culture that has left written or oral records describes giants. They describe them in detail. They describe their size, their strength, their violence, their origins, and their destruction. And yet we are told by modern academia that these are myths, that ancient people simply made up the same story independently, that there is no truth to any of it. But that explanation requires a level of coincidence that strains credulity. How did the Hebrews, the Sumerians, the Hindus, the Greeks, the Norse, the Chinese, the Native Americans, civilizations separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all invent the same story, the same details, the same genetic anomalies, 6 fingers, 6 toes, double rows of teeth, the same behaviors, cannibalism, violence, insatiable appetite, the same origins, offspring of gods and humans, and the same end, destruction by flood or fire or divine intervention? The answer is simple. They did not invent it. They recorded it. They witnessed it. They survived it. And they passed down the warning, the knowledge, the memory of a time when giants walked the earth, when the gods came down from the heavens, when humanity was young and the world was stranger and more terrifying than we can imagine. The texts are not mythology, they are testimony. And the testimony, when examined without bias, without the need to conform to modern assumptions, points to a single inescapable truth. Giants were real. They lived among us. They built the monuments we cannot explain. And their bloodline, diluted but persistent, survives to this day. The question is not whether they existed. The evidence has already answered that. The question is, where did they go? And are they coming back? The testimony of the ancients, vivid and unanimous, makes one thing clear. But what about the modern age? What happens when myth collides with the lens of science? And the truth is questioned not in dusty libraries, but on the excavation sites of archaeologists, under the microscopes of geneticists, and in the swirling databanks of modern technology. This is not where the story ends. It is where the story begins to gain teeth, as what was once dismissed as mere fable begins to show traces in physical evidence, genetic anomalies, and discoveries that even now, institutions scramble to reclassify, to dismiss, or, if necessary, to quietly disappear. Start with the bones. In the Americas, from Ohio to Nevada, official reports and newspaper headlines of the 19th and early 20th centuries tell of skeletons up to 10 feet tall uncovered in burial mounds and caves, only for the evidence to be misplaced shortly after finding its way into the hands of prominent museums or the Smithsonian itself. The Hopewell Mounds, Lovelock Cave, Sardinian graveyards all ringing with the same pattern. Bones discovered, records made, then a mystery. The physical proof recedes into legend again, but the consistency, from continent to continent, era to era, should make even the most hardened skeptic wonder. How can so many false discoveries be described so similarly by so many? And why do so many of these bones vanish before they can be independently studied and verified? There are, of course, those who claim all this is mere double counting, misidentification, even outright fraud. Yet even among the dismissals, slips of authenticity surface. In Egypt, unearthed pits reportedly filled with massive right hands, allegedly war trophies seized from giants defeated in ancient battles, briefly captured the attention of the archaeological world. The finding was quietly catalogued, then moved to obscurity. In Europe, enormous leather shoes, longer than most modern feet, stubbornly resist explanation. Misfit artifacts, yes, but they persist in the written record, in museum inventories, sometimes as mere curiosities, because accepting their implications would crack open long-held assumptions about prehistory. Science demands proof, but science also demands that proof be preserved, studied, scrutinized. What happens when the physical remains disappear, when skeletal evidence is spirited away, when artifacts are classified or lost? Is it then reasonable to dismiss the entire body of testimony across cultures and ages? Or does this very pattern, the vanishing, the silence, raise more questions than it silences? The modern archaeological record, despite centuries of excavations, offers little in the way of intact, publicized giant skeletons. Yet it yields a shadow evidence by negative space. The megalithic fortresses of Bashan, the basalt wheels of Rujmelhiri in the Golan, Cyclopean masonry around the Mediterranean, Neolithic dolmens in Jordan, and Palestine structures so massive and ancient, the effort and precision required to create them would be staggering even for giants, inconceivable for populations of diminutive Bronze Age farmers. These are monuments that do not fit their context, yet there they stand, mute and monumental, outlasting empires, religions, and the very cultures that now claim them. Then there are the genetic mysteries. Across Europe, Asia, and pockets of the Americas, up to 15 of people possess Rh-negative blood, a type missing the most basic protein found in the red cells of any normal primate lineage. This blood type cannot be easily cloned, and it is capable of causing deadly fetal rejection unless managed by modern medicine. No evolutionary model explains its origin. Where did Rh-negative come from, and why does it cluster in regions known for ancient myths of giants and gods? Are these the lingering whispers of a hybrid past, a marker left by a population so anomalous that only myth remains to describe their presence? In the last decade, advances in DNA analysis have unearthed even stranger shadows. The remains of the so-called Denisovans, an archaic human population with genetic traces stretching from Siberia to Southeast Asia, reveal individuals far larger and more robust than their Homo sapiens contemporaries. The bones, the teeth, the DNA all speak of a group that vanished, their genes folding into the margins of the modern world into Himalayan Sherpas, Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and echoes elsewhere. But for every tiny fragment confirmed, legends abound in which ancient races taller and stronger than any living man ruled before the coming of modern humanity. Artifacts, too, refuse to keep silent. Oversized tools and weapons have been recovered from prehistoric settlements whose usages by any human hand of normal proportions would verge on the impossible. Massive axes, hammers, and spearheads that are displayed only briefly before being relocated, misfiled, or simply removed from public view. Armor scales, spearheads, and bronze weapons unearthed in Israel at Monach, Tel Gath, or Megiddo fit the biblical measurements described in weight and proportions for Goliath and his kin. Their size is not an abstraction, but measurable, weighty, matched almost perfectly to the most famous scriptural giants. The finders note the parallels, the similarities, the eerie congruence between what is written and what is unearthed. Before their discoveries too return to obscurity, reclassified as ceremonial, symbolic, or sometimes simply unique. Even more curious are the genetic phenomena. Recent studies reveal traces of ghost population DNA in human genomes, ancient genetic signatures that do not match any known human, Neanderthal, or Denisovan lineages, and which, according to models, must belong to a population that existed in meaningful numbers before being erased from the gene pool. Who were they? Were they the remains of the Nephilim, the Anakim, the giants memorialized in myth and stone? Science cannot say, because science insists on measuring the visible, the preserved. But the signatures are there, haunting our chromosomes, refusing to be named, never quite vanishing. And yet, for every claim, a counterclaim. Authorities, whenever confronted, insist on mundane explanations, map bones to mammoths or mastodons, label artifacts as anomalies, pass off misshapen skulls as products of ritual binding or disease. They assure us that all skeletons, no matter the record, fell within normal human range, or if not, that a cataloging error occurred, or that the remains have unfortunately decayed, been contaminated, or were lost during institutional moves. The world shrugs, reassured, every question closed, except for the silence itself and the undeniable, relentless, cross-cultural roar of testimony that persists in texts, stories, symbols, and outlier remains. And so the question becomes more acute: why silence? Why the pattern of discovery followed by disappearance, the consistency of stories followed by a refusal to engage with their material traces? Is the silence the sound of myth dying, or the roaring hush of a truth too dangerous for orthodoxy to bear? What happens when the testimony of the ancients aligns with the faint evidence that seeps up through the cracks in bones, blood, stones, and DNA? The answer is both disturbing and compelling. The ancients remembered a time when those of great stature giants, Nephilim, hybrid beings born of divine and human union, ruled the world, built its oldest wonders, left their fingerprints in sandstone and basalt, and were ultimately destroyed in violence, catastrophic floods, and divine judgment. Texts preserve the story. Whispers of their presence haunt our genetics, our architecture, our folklore. If the remains remain hidden, if the artifacts are lost, if the bones turn to dust while the stories endure, then maybe it is not the physical evidence that has failed us. Maybe it is our willingness to confront a world far stranger than what we are told is possible. The question is no longer, did the giants exist? But rather, why are we forbidden to remember them? And what is it that those in power fear we would discover, if the veil of silence was ever lifted? Human genetics holds secrets that challenge our conventional understanding of evolution and ancestry. One of the most striking mysteries is the presence of Rh-negative blood among 15 of global populations, primarily concentrated in Europe and parts of the Middle East and Asia. Rh-negative blood lacks a protein crucial in other mammals, including modern humans and primates, making it biologically anomalous. It leads to hemolytic disease in newborns without medical intervention, is impossible to clone currently, and its evolutionary origin is poorly understood. Such patterns suggest an origin not from natural human populations, but possibly introduced by genetic hybridization with a non-human species, a hypothesis aligning with ancient accounts of divine or extraterrestrial gene mixing among humanity's ancestors. The persistence of Rh-negative bloodlines in areas historically associated with myths of giants and gods adds further intrigue, suggesting a biological legacy of these ancient beings. In parallel, paleoanthropology has uncovered evidence associated with archaic human species such as the Denisovans, whose existence was unknown until recent decades. Genetic analyses have confirmed that Denisovans interbred with Homo sapiens, contributing segments of DNA still present in today's populations, especially in Tibetan Highlanders and Melanesians. Fossilized remains indicate significant robustness and likely a larger stature compared to typical Homo sapiens. Intriguingly, some legends describe these ancient populations as giants or beings of extraordinary size and strength, which aligns with scientific observations of these archaic genetic contributions. These connections support the idea that our modern genome carries traces of encounters with other hominids, potentially including giant races referenced in global myths. The archaeological record complements genetic mysteries with physical artifacts of anomalous scale and craftsmanship. Oversized tools, such as hammers and spears found in ancient battlefields and settlement sites, correlate closely with biblical and mythological descriptions of giants, weaponry, and labor implements. These artifacts' sizes exceed the practical capacity of normal humans, pointing toward users of significantly greater physical dimensions. Despite repeated discoveries, many such items have been placed in restricted collections, reclassified, or their existence minimized, revealing a pattern of suppression within institutional archaeology. These instruments strongly imply the presence of giant beings capable of wielding them, thus lending credibility to the legends preserved in religious and cultural texts. Further complicating the narrative, scientists have observed unexpected ghost population DNA sequences within the human genome that do not match any known or extinct hominid species, including Neanderthals and Denisovans. These enigmatic genetic signatures suggest a historically significant population, now extinct and not well documented in the fossil record, which could correspond to the legendary giants or hybrid beings described in religious and mythological contexts. While mainstream science hesitates to incorporate these findings into established evolutionary frameworks, the genetic evidence insists on deeper investigation, challenging the orthodoxy and hinting at lost chapters in humanity's past. Despite efforts to dismiss or explain away these anomalies, the growing interdisciplinary research spanning genetics, anthropology, and archaeology converges on the need for reassessment. This evidence collectively undermines the neat narratives of linear human evolution and isolated cultural myth-making. Instead, it suggests that giants, or beings of extraordinary size and mixed genetic heritage, were an integral part of human history, influencing civilization's foundations. The traditional academic narrative is thus called into question, prompting renewed interest and debate regarding ancient DNA studies, fossil discoveries, and the interpretation of ancient texts. Within this evolving scientific landscape, Part 5 highlights the latest research trends and findings. These contemporary studies not only corroborate some of the ancient descriptions, but also uncover new details about how such beings might have influenced humanity's development. By tracing genetic markers, comparing fossil morphology, and integrating archaeological discoveries, scholars gain greater insight into a complex prehistoric world, one cohabited by modern humans and other, perhaps much larger, hominid species. These revelations, while controversial, encourage wider academic and public engagement with ideas previously relegated to mythology and conspiracy. Thus, the narrative advances, from ancient texts and monumental stones to the double helix of DNA and fossilized bone. The story of the giants is being re-examined in light of cutting-edge science. These advancements reinforce the argument that the giants were not mere fantasy, but real entities whose physical and genetic legacy endures in subtle, often overlooked forms in the present day. As scientific inquiry continues to push boundaries, what was once dismissed as mythology gains empirical support, challenging us to reconsider the origins of humanity and the true architects of our ancient past. Recent discoveries in ancient DNA extraction have revolutionized our understanding of extinct species and archaic humans, enabling scientists to reconstruct genomes of beings that walked the Earth hundreds of thousands and even millions of years ago. From a 400,000-year-old femur found in Spain, researchers recently sequenced DNA more closely related to Denisovans than to Neanderthals or modern Homo sapiens, revealing a lineage of ancient humans previously unknown, broadening our evolutionary narrative far beyond linear ascent. These Denisovan-related populations were robust, likely taller and stronger, lending credence to long-standing legends of giants in prehistoric times. Fossilized skeletons signaling gigantism, often dismissed as pathological anomalies, gain new gravity as scientific scrutiny increases. In Italy, Esgrimaldi caves, skeletons dating back 29,000 years, reveal individuals standing over 6 feet 5 inches tall, well above typical prehistoric averages, and providing possible real-world roots for towering mythic ancestors. These fossils help reverse the dismissive bias surrounding anomalously tall human remains, suggesting that towering stature might have been an adaptation or feature of distinct populations coexisting with early Homo sapiens. A remarkable case is that of the Segorbe giant, an 11th-century individual found in Spain, a complete ancient skeleton, standing 6 feet 3 inches tall. Genetic analysis showed admixture of Berber North African lineages and classical European ancestry, highlighting a population with diverse roots and complex migrations, with stature distinctly above average for the period and locale. Such finds offer crucial windows into how height, robust features, and possibly larger body mass might have been preserved in certain human groups, forming the biological groundwork of giant myths across cultures. Advancements in ancient DNA technology not only enabled genome sequencing of extinct giant lemurs and other megafauna, but also hint at the existence of significant genetic diversity in groups inhabiting prehistoric environments, such as Madagascar, where enormous lemurs as large as gorillas once thrived. These discoveries illuminate how diverse and biologically rich the ancient world was, and by extension, how early human populations might have been similarly varied and genetically complex, with giant stature conditions possibly more widespread than previously assumed. The intersection of these paleogenetic breakthroughs with archaeological and anthropological data challenges conventional evolutionary paradigms. They place humanity within a broader context marked by genetic mingling with multiple archaic populations, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly others unknown or dismissed as myth. Each admixture event likely introduced genetic variations that manifested physically, some possibly resulting in the extraordinary heights and strengths described as giants in global folklore. Moreover, these revelations prompt reconsideration of how ancient civilizations related to beings of giant stature. Long-standing questions: how were massive structures moved and shaped? How did mythic beings shape cultural and religious narratives gain new perspective when the biological reality of larger-bodied hominids is acknowledged? The blending of scientific discoveries and mythological accounts suggests a world where men and giants interacted, influencing technological development, spiritual beliefs, and even social hierarchies. Clarity emerges as we recognize that many giants throughout history and legend might have been members of populations with gigantism rooted in genetic legacy or archaic hominid ancestry. While certain individuals with pituitary gigantism are medically documented, the broader population evidence points to larger groups or lineages where tall stature was common, possibly honored and mythologized, as texts throughout history indicate. The legacy of giants, therefore, is twofold: biological and cultural. Physically, they left genetic markers and bone fragments embedded in time. Culturally, they inspired stories that transcend geography and epoch, pervasive across continents and civilizations. The study of these markers is ongoing, and while mainstream science remains cautious, the momentum grows in interdisciplinary circles eager to explore the boundary where myth meets measurable reality. Nearly every civilization possesses a flood story, over 270 distinct traditions, recounting a deluge sent to cleanse the world. From Mesopotamia's epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical account of Noah's Ark, from the Hindu Manu story to indigenous North American flood myths, the recurrence is striking. These stories are not coincidences, nor merely symbolic. They encode a shared memory of a cataclysmic event that redrew the boundaries of ancient civilizations and erased dominant populations, especially the giants whose presence had long threatened humanity as fragile order. Geological records corroborate these ancient accounts. Approximately 12,800 years ago, a globally recognized event, the Younger Dryas impact, triggered abrupt climate shifts, massive wildfires, and a near wipeout of megafauna. The Antarctic ice sheet, a colossal reservoir of frozen water, is believed to have fractured and slipped into the oceans, unleashing tsunamis and floods on an unprecedented scale. Rivers overflowed, lands submerged, and the ecological balance shattered. This was no ordinary flood. It was a planetary-scale disaster arising from cosmic forces intersecting with Earth's fragile environment. Archaeological sites reflect the consequences of this calamity. Prehistoric cities show signs of sudden abandonment, entire food webs collapsed, and the extinction of species such as the woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tiger aligns with this timeline. Human populations plunged, genetic bottlenecks emerged, and cultural memory transformed into myths and legends. Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known monumental temple complex, was deliberately buried around this time, hiding evidence of a prior sophisticated civilization, possibly built by giants or their human allies. The destruction was not impartial. It targeted the giants directly. Texts from the Book of Enoch and others assert that divine forces sought to cleanse the earth of Nephilim corruption. Their insatiable appetites, insurrection against cosmic order, and violent disruption of natural and human systems marked them as threats needing removal. Floodwaters and catastrophic fires purged their presence, leaving only scattered survivors and diluted bloodlines. Sites connected with ancestral giants, such as cave complexes rich in oversized human remains, show evidence of violent ends, burned chambers, mass graves, and hasty abandonments. Yet the narrative of annihilation contains a paradox. Despite the floods, despite the cataclysms, the giants' blood did not vanish entirely. Hidden survivors, isolated tribes, and diluted genetic lines persisted in remote mountain ranges, deep forest refuges, and scattered islands. Their memory passed orally, their influence woven subtly into the genetic fabric of contemporary populations that carry anomalous traits, extraordinary height, unusual blood types, and rare genetic markers incompatible with pure Homo sapiens ancestry. These pockets of persistence worry ancient leaders and modern elites alike, as bloodlines carry old powers and secrets vital to control and legitimacy. Royal and aristocratic bloodlines, particularly in Europe but also in parts of Asia and Africa, bear markers and traditions tracing back to these giants. Terms such as blue blood and genealogical records boast claims of divine or semi-divine origins. Physical traits, height, bone structure, and sometimes unusual medical conditions spark debate about genetic inheritance from non-human ancestors. The obsession with maintaining blood purity and power may reflect a desire to retain fragments of this potent heritage. Ancient monuments, tombs, and sacred sites are found clustered around regions historically linked to giants and their creators, the Anunnaki, lending credibility to claims of hidden knowledge and inherited power. Governments and secret organizations, historically and contemporarily, appear invested in suppressing direct knowledge of giants and their origins. Official archaeological records often omit or downplay giant remains. Museum exhibitions rarely display such findings openly. Scientific papers classify evidence under alternative, less threatening terms. In conspiracy theorist circles and some academic whistleblowers, claims arise of deliberate campaigns to conceal truths that would upheave established political, scientific, and religious narratives. The preservation of this secrecy is evident in restricted archaeological sites, such as those in the Empty Quarter of Saudi Arabia, where ancient ruins possibly linked to giants remain locked and off-limits to independent exploration. Similarly, Antarctic explorations uncover mounting evidence of anomalous buildings and artifacts beneath thick ice, prompting fears that returning giants or their descendants could awaken. Global military and scientific operations in remote areas suggest preparation for potentially paradigm-shifting revelations or arrivals. Flood myths across multiple cultures reflect not only physical disasters, but encoded warnings about the return of powerful beings. Prophecies hint at cycles of cosmic events tied to the gods' or giants' return, suggesting a repeating timeline measured in millennia. The 3,600-year orbit of Nibiru, often cited in ancient astronomy, serves as a cosmic clock for these apocalyptic passages. As human society grapples with technological advancement, environmental crises, and geopolitical tensions, the reawakening of these ancient cycles threatens to bring old powers back into the light, challenging the very fabric of reality and human authority. This realization crystallizes the ultimate question posed by the Giant Saga. If their bloodlines survive and their creator's return is imminent, what will the future hold? Will humanity remain slaves to ancient, alien bloodlines? Will the world descend into chaos under their resurgence? Or can a new dawning of understanding, cooperation, and awakening emerge? These are not questions of fantasy, but of urgent relevance, encoded through millennia in myth and science alike, waiting for their answers in our lifetime. Building directly upon the cataclysmic events and bloodline survivals explored in Part 7, Part 8 dives into the enigmatic legacy of these ancient giants as it weaves through the corridors of power, secret knowledge, and elite bloodlines. This section investigates how the remnants of the giants' genetic heritage have been preserved, revered, and manipulated by ruling classes across civilizations, and how this ongoing connection to the past shapes modern hierarchies and conspiracies about hidden truths. The story of giant bloodlines surviving does not conclude with their mythic or prehistoric purge. Instead, it continues in the grand halls of ancient royalty and modern aristocracy. From European kingdoms to Asian dynasties, from African chieftaincies to Native American leadership traditions, claims of divine or semi-divine descent underpin the legitimacy of rulers and elites. The repeated motif of blue blood signifies more than noble lineage. It marks a belief in inherited supernatural or extraordinary genetic heritage attributed to giants or celestial beings. Such beliefs persist explicitly in royal genealogies and implicitly in secret societies guarding esoteric knowledge. Genetic studies reveal extraordinary concentrations of Rh-negative blood among these elite groups, far exceeding the general population. The Basques of northern Spain and France, known for their unique language and genetic profiles, exhibit one of the highest rates of this blood type, as do many members of European nobility. Rh-negative blood, with its peculiar biochemical properties, aligns suspiciously well with legends of giant hybrid bloodlines. Could the survival of these lineages be as much genetic as genealogical? If the giants were partly divine or extraterrestrial in origin, their descendants might bear unique physiological markers continuing today within aristocratic genetics. Historical rulers famed for their extraordinary size or power often sat atop these bloodlines. King Og of Bashan, the biblical giant whose iron bed measured over 13 feet, was more than a myth. He stood as an emblem of rulership tied to supernatural ancestry. Similarly, pharaohs of Egypt often depicted themselves alongside giant gods like Anubis or Horus, projecting a lineage that conferred both divine right and formidable strength. Elongated skulls found in royal tombs, physical statuesque descriptions, and intentional lineage claims all reinforce the notion of rulers consciously aligning themselves with ancient giant ancestry to legitimize their sovereignty. Royal dynasties preserved their blood purity through arranged marriages within narrow circles, perpetuating specific genetic traits, sometimes consciously enhancing or masking them. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a genetic deformity resulting from intermarriage, provides physical evidence of such selective breeding. While scholars debate the medical causes, the consistent physical anomalies in royal families suggest an intentional consolidation of genetic traits, possibly inherited from hybrid ancestors. The mystique surrounding royal blood encapsulates centuries of guarded lineage and hidden identity, as elites maintain traditions shrouded in ritual and secrecy to protect their ancient inheritance. Ancient Egyptian sites, such as the pyramids of Giza and the temple complexes of Luxor and Karnak, contain countless symbols and inscriptions referencing gods who mingled with humans and bestowed wisdom and power. These sacred sites, guarded for centuries, contain encrypted messages concerning the interbreeding of gods and humans and the transfer of esoteric technology and knowledge. They operate as vaults of forbidden wisdom, accessible only to those perceived as descendants or initiated custodians of the giant legacy. Secret societies and religious orders claim descent from these ancient figures, perpetuating rituals purported to honor and continue this heritage. Similar patterns emerge in other parts of the world. The native rulers of regions long believed to be influenced or governed by giant bloodlines maintained traditions and ceremonies tied to ancestral giants. For example, some Native American tribes recount histories where their leadership status was sanctified by descent from mighty giants who served as protectors and lawgivers. African royal families boast storied genealogies extending back to demigods or colossal ancestors, blending myth with lineage as a source of authority and social control. The royal courts of India and Southeast Asia similarly emphasize ties to celestial beings or semi-divine giants, immortalized in epics and traced through elaborate genealogies. Institutional power and the control of knowledge surrounding these bloodlines have played critical roles across history. From the secrecy surrounding archaeological sites that might reveal giant remains to the veiled references in coded manuscripts, select groups have maintained a monopoly on the truth regarding ancient hybrid genetics. Allegations of cover-ups extend from the destruction or concealment of skeletal finds to the suppression of genetic evidence and the control of academic discourse. This reinforces an ongoing struggle between the guardians of the hidden history and those driven to uncover it, a tension that persists into modern times. In contemporary society, parallels appear in the fascination and fear surrounding bloodline purity, secret societies, and elite conspiracies. Groups such as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and various dynastic lineages claim esoteric knowledge descending from the giants and their creators, the Anunnaki. Public skepticism and conspiracy theories often paint these societies as conspirators in hiding alien heritages and advanced knowledge. Whether true or exaggerated, the consistent tying of ancient giant lore to secretive elite organizations indicates a powerful undercurrent of belief and influence anchored deep in human history. Such bloodlines are often suggested to wield unspoken influence over political, economic, and cultural spheres, maintaining their status through not only genetics but information control. The controversial concept of the Illuminati bloodline, a cluster of families with claimed giant or extraterrestrial ancestry, illustrates how these ideas permeate modern discourse on global power. While much of this remains speculative, it reflects widespread awareness and anxiety about hidden lineage and ancient legacies influencing contemporary events, suggesting that the giants' influence extends beyond mere myth into the present. Finally, whether through preservation, mythic honor, or deliberate secrecy, the surviving bloodlines continue to shape human civilization in subtle yet profound ways. The past reaches into the present, weaving a complex narrative of power, genetics, and identity. The ancestral giants may no longer walk visibly among us, but their legacy coded in DNA, enshrined in ritual, and mirrored in legend continues to echo. The unfolding journey into these bloodlines invites us to rethink history, challenge accepted narratives, and uncover the truths hidden beneath layers of time and secrecy, as humanity stands at a crossroads between forgotten pasts and emerging futures. The ancient prophecies aligned with myths of giants and celestial visitors converge on a common theme: a return. The second coming of biblical lore, the Kali Yuga's end in Hindu tradition, the Mayan calendar CS twilight date, and the Sumerian tablets portent of Nibiru's reappearance all speak of cycles not merely of time, but of divine intervention and upheaval. These mythic and historic clocks measure passages spanning millennia, marking calamities and rebirth. The apocalyptic clock ticks inexorably forward, foreshadowing a cosmic event that could unfold within our lifetime. At the heart of these cosmic prophecies is Nibiru, or Planet X, a hypothesized massive object orbiting the outer edges of our solar system every 3,600 years. Scientific inquiry, from gravitational anomalies in the Kuiper Belt to infrared space telescope data, increasingly supports the existence of a large, hidden planet exerting powerful influence. While publicly shrouded in secrecy and speculation, evidence suggests governments have long known of Nibiru's existence, its orbital pattern, and its destructive potential. If Nibiru's return coincides with the Anunnaki's homecoming, then the re-emergence of the giants is also imminent. Their bloodline, long mingled with humanity's, might be reactivated through burgeoning genetic engineering technologies. Reports of gene editing, CRISPR research, and experimentation aimed at height, endurance, and cognitive enhancement raise unsettling possibilities, biologically resurrecting traits once attributed to the giants. This is not science fiction, but a reality quietly advancing under the radar of public awareness. Simultaneously, ancient sites once abandoned or buried are showing signs of mysterious reactivation. Pyramids in Egypt, the Americas, and other sites exhibit new energy emissions detected by satellite and ground instruments. Stonehenge and similar megalithic sites align surprisingly with current astronomical phenomena, suggesting a long-perceived cycle being reawakened or observed by unknown forces. This intertwining of archaic knowledge and modern science elevates the question: are we witnessing a reinitialization of ancient power systems, long dormant but now returning? At the same time, elites across the globe prepare. Secret installations, underground bunkers, and restricted scientific projects increase in number and scope. The richest and most powerful invest heavily in subterranean habitats and technologies designed to survive cataclysms, hinting at a foreknowledge of impending upheaval. Some conspiracy theories assert this is part of a broader plan to reclaim or control ancient legacies, ensuring dominance in a world reshaped by the giants' resurgence. This fusion of history, mythology, science, and conspiracy culminates in a profound question posed to humanity. Will we stand as mere subjects to ancient overlords seeking re-establishment, or as awakened descendants reclaiming our full heritage? The giants were said to be creators, enslavers, and judges, but also protectors and innovators. Their return, shrouded in prophecy and cosmic inevitability, offers not only peril but possibility. It beckons a choice between subjugation and liberation, repetition and renewal. To confront this daunting legacy is to engage with our deepest origins and potential. It requires transcending accepted historical narratives, embracing scientific exploration alongside mythic wisdom, and recognizing the shadows of power that still influence our world. The giants built the pyramids. They left indelible marks within our bones and legends. They await their cosmic return. The question now is not may they return, but how will we respond? Thus, the story comes full circle ancient truth, hidden for millennia, revealed through enduring bloodlines, forgotten tombs, celestial mathematics, and clandestine modern endeavors. Like a fairy tale with a dark undertow, the giant saga reminds us that history is never fixed, and reality can be stranger than fiction. Their story ends not with closure, but with awakening, inviting every one of us to peer beyond the veil, seek the concealed knowledge, and carve our place in the unfolding chronicle of human destiny. The giants built the past. We hold the key to the future.